as far as I know, the formats, the independent school for the city, and the audience usually attending the events, even from the before the wartime. I was trying to put a little bit more information about what we do specifically related to the reconstruction and to the recovery. And actually, there is a difference between these two words in the context of Ukraine right now, and we can discuss a little bit more about that during the open mic part. So I named this input. I don't want to put this a lecture, but just a way to share thoughts and context and what is going on, basically, because it's not kind of a lecture of what was done previously in the past. It is very much dynamic environment which changes every week. So sometimes I'm looking at my past presentations from, I don't know, a few months ago, and was so different. So I called it Ukraine War Recovery, a rescue operation during the storm. And that sets pretty much the context that basically what we are doing right now, we are trying to prepare and to start already the recovery once the war is still going on. And what does it mean? I'll try to share with you within the next 40 minutes already. So as I was asked to talk a little bit more about the Restart Ukraine, so I selected one of the slides we've done before, which is a kind of maybe a little bit naive description of what is Restart Ukraine, but this is the one of the early slides when the war has started, and basically Restart Ukraine was built out of the basis of this agency I was leading. It still exists. I'm still leading it in 3 weeks after the war. So the war has started 24th of February 2022. We've started to do something already in mid-March. And what we started to do with is that we analyzed the kind of best practices. We thought that it is a right way to do things, or at least to a little bit expand our understanding what could be our trajectories, what could be our ways. And immediately we looked at our cities, which were heavily shaped and defined by the post-Second World War recovery, which was done in a kind of modernistic Soviet style based around the car and the distances which were not really human oriented and human sized. And this is something which exists so far in Ukrainian cities and municipalities. So we thought, okay, we need to come out with our own view to things. Nobody asked, obviously, because the government had so many things to do when the war has started, and the local administrations were paralyzed with this specific matter. They were very much agile and resilient in terms of providing first aid, evacuation, and humanitarian response. But we felt that there is kind of a niche that has to be filled, and due to our availability and our desire to do something proactively, we started our journey. And I will try to give you this input in 3 parts, which is about the context, not only about urban-rural planning, but about how things actually work in Ukraine. And this is the reason I would like to provide it is that what we understood after analyzing Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon cases, or Yugoslavia, or post Second World War, that the context matters so much that some practices could not be entirely copy pasted from one setup to another. So there's an opportunity to maybe recall and to try to improvise with the frameworks, but not specifically with the very precise ways which were done in the recovery before. We've done some few cases on the recovery topic, and I will go through one of them, and we can actually then look maybe in additionally another ones if time will allow, or there will be another specific request. So I will show on the recovery case the logics we were following within our recovery understanding and journey and discovery. And then I would also love to share, however, I wasn't really asked to do that, but I think it is important for you, perhaps future practitioners, already owners of the studios, or somebody thinks about it, how it looked from the inside, because usually we see the products the office or the bureau does. However, rarely I hear from the colleagues in the field how they describe their journey organization-wise. So let's go there through the context. So I think that all of you understand that there is no need to emphasize once again that on the 24th of February, like things changed dramatically. And, not to emphasize too much on that, just one quick fact that I think everybody in Ukraine now understands that there will be no back to norm before that time. So our future, all our actions in urban planning, urban development will be a subject to existential threat from Russian Federation, and not only within this war, but the context is that people speak now about the next wars once the Russia will be defeated this time. So basically, it was now operating within absolutely stressful mode, and during the first period of time, there was no stability, there was no norm, and the amount of typologies which happened in Ukraine was huge, was humongous, and the reason I am showing that is not necessarily to get your emotion on that, but to understand that this war is purely urban or rural, in a way that the majority of the battle is happening in the city, for the municipalities, for the specific settlements. So basically, the settlements were the places where all the stress has come. Of course, we understand the ecosystems are part of that, but it is not a field where two armies confront each other. It is a battle for the cities. So basically, the war has highlighted the fragility, all the drawbacks and all the threats of the city, which we were thinking about during basic SWOT analysis some time ago, when it was like a peaceful time and we were just sitting calmly developing these strategies. Another aspect I would like to also address is that recovery is still tackled in a sectorial approach, which doesn't really help the process. So I won't be very much romantic about how the recovery is going on. It's a stressful process. It is a huge amount of stakeholders involved, and before the war, there was no culture of this cross-sectorial dialogue. It was very rare, and this is something which we are trying to activate and promote. But within the stressful conditions, we need to understand that there is no magic pill that will switch organizations which with the decades of institutional memory to start working all of a sudden in a different manner, and no magic has happened. So basically, the people were trying to do their best within the frameworks which they were used to work, very practical and very sometimes primitive. So right now, it is a big challenge to bring different cultures, different organizations, different institutions to the same table in order to start talking to each other about the basic plans, about the very, very simple things, and then go more to complex concepts. So what are the bottlenecks right now within the process of the recovery? And I would like to underline and highlight that money, of course, it is an important resource for that. However, the main bottlenecks right now would be the shared vision and idea of the recovery. And this is an ongoing process right now on 3 different levels. on the level of the country. So after the Ukrainian Recovery Conference in London this year, from the EU, there was presented a Ukrainian facility plan, which ensures an amount of 50 billion euro for midterm projects between 2024 and 2027. So basically the money is there. However, the vision has to be created. There are also an updated process of getting the visions of the regions, because as we will look at the map later, the war has changed not only the cities as such, it has changed the geopolitics of the configuration of the country, because previously Ukraine was very much tied economically, logistically to Russia, to Belarus. Basically, Russia and Belarus is 70% of the land border of Ukraine, and Ukraine being placed between, let's say, EU and roughly Asia, was very much taking advantage of this, of its transit position. As well, it was taken, to be fair, it was taken advantage of the previous inertial links built in the Soviet Union. So if you look a little bit more to the Soviet Union history, it was done in a way that the economics of the Soviet republics were not able to function one without another, and some strategic enterprises were dispersed all around Soviet Union, so that in the middle of the nowhere in the south of Ukraine, you could have a kind of a leather factory which was serving half of Soviet Union with the production. And after the collapse of Soviet Union, some of the links have stayed, and the economy was, of course, on the way towards the market economy. However, there was a lot of connections. So once after the war, all of a sudden, these connections were broken. And what I'm trying to say is that geopolitical context immediately started to matter. Black Sea started to be really a scene between all the surrounding countries of how do we deliver goods to the ports of Ukraine, and how do we actually export grain from there, how do we create safe corridors, etc. So vision and ideas on the national, regional, and local levels are right now the subject of the very active discussion, which doesn't really give yes/no answer. There is a range of varieties of options, and you have to balance. There's no best option. It's a trade-off, basically. People, to give you a little bit of the recent statistics, 5 million out of let's say 42 million of Ukrainians before the war have left, mainly female and children, which gives us a huge risk towards the demographic pyramid, and gives us a huge risk in the midterm and long-term perspective about who would be the working generation, where the youth would be placed. And the recent surveys were showing that I think every third person outside of the EU, outside of Ukraine, sorry, are thinking about staying there for longer, not going back. And this is a quite open question: how do we actually rebalance the demography of Ukraine once we fight the aggressor back? The working formats, we can talk a little bit about it later. Absorption capacity, basically, even if you have money, how do you actually define the working process? How do you know specific projects? How do you have enough project managers? Very basic questions, but the last estimation today, I was in the forum about the recovery. The last estimation is that we need approximately 30,000 of project managers in order to meet, this potential supply of this funding, in order to connect it to the needs of the cities and municipalities. And very often this is the capacity, this is the human resource we expect to find on the ground. However, very often we don't. So once we have started our journey on the recovery, we tried to go what was asked to explain a little bit more in evidence-based decision-making matter. And we thought, yeah, a little bit in utopian way that we should collect the data, we should allocate the places where we will bring people back, where they will be not as people in the refugee camps creating ghettos, but they would be activating the local economy, that we will be addressing the carbon footprint of the debris, of the debris, and kind of develop effective schemes of its management, that within our recovery efforts, we will address also not only the war consequences, but also try to look a little bit further into the climate change, into the sea level rise, into the possible food and water crisis, migration crisis. So all these types of challenges will find a way to be incorporated in the city's spatial strategies. How do we bring the memory back to the city? Both the pre-war points of memory, but also new points of memory which are related and connected to the war, so that people return back to the cities, they at least know a little bit, and there are no copy paste from somewhere else, from the database of other cities in the world, which were just like copied and recreated in Ukraine. And then we clearly see that there is a need for this institutional shift in the paradigm from the Soviet urban planning, which was kind of inherited by Ukraine until the early 2010s. Once the revolution of dignity in 2014 has happened, people, especially young people, started to care about the place they live in and started to take the responsibility. And this profession of urbanist emerged from the profession of activist, and then started to institutionalize through the informal education, such analog of independent school for the city, which is called Connections in Ukraine. But then it was actually pursued by the academic institutions, by universities, which opened these new urban programs for the students. However, that capacity was not enough, so that the field of urban planning and urbanists in Ukraine, in a way, I guess you perceive it, is not numerous. We are, to be honest, I don't know how many us they are in Ukraine. However, it is not enough. And this is another type of bottleneck we are now experiencing, that we might face after the deoccupation, simultaneous need for the recovery of thousands of municipalities. However, we don't have this amount of capacity. So either we train or we bring people from outside and brief them carefully, which is also a question: how do we connect it to the relevant financial instruments? Because for us, it is not a studio, it is not a learning case. For us, it is the reality. And what we do is, and I will share it in a bit, is we work with real people, and we face their lack of trust, either to administration from the previous years or from trauma from the war. So basically what we have to do is to establish a number of steps which will eventually lead towards the change. So basically we suggest an alternative from just building some kind of random objects without any strategy into this analytical approach, where we analyze the data, analyze the social needs, we analyze what might hit the place in the future and kind of synthesize it in the strategy. And very important, we link it to the funding mechanisms. Otherwise, it would be another strategy in the table of the administration, and like nothing will happen, and the basic approach will be undermined. So that's why we have the participation here, and eventually the new types of construction, which will allow us to decrease the amount of the carbon footprint. But here we come again to another dilemma, that the leadership of the country, and I think a lot of people who lost their houses and their flats would like to get it recovered as soon as possible. However, the capacities we have for the construction industry is very much conventional. So it's basically concrete, reinforced concrete, bricks, timber. So it's not that environmentally friendly. So once you want to create something more low carbon, you need to invent a new sector of the industry, or you bring it to the country. But then we enter another dilemma that the country is still in the state of the war. So how do we recover quickly, quick enough, and green enough? This is kind of balance we are trying to face. Okay, so now we go to the practice. And for me, it was really important to give you the context of the first part, because I believe this practice without a context would be looking just like a case from some others countries' work. But it is critically important to understand like what Ukraine was going on through without the war, to understand like what are the approaches and what are the choices we have made. So from the very beginning, we were looking at the recovery with all the challenges and with all the threats through the prism of two main variables, which were space and time. So basically, time is something we are not able to manage. So if it's gone, it's gone. Space is another variable, which for us is important to check and to keep in mind, because the period between the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and I think the early 2010s was the period of chaotic construction, and a lot of cities have lost their historical areas due to just corrupted schemes between the city leaders and the developers. And what we are trying to say here is that the space is the asset, and it's better to have no building for a longer time rather than any building for a very quick period of time if there is no urgent need. So we are trying to say that there are three phases we are trying to suggest, that there is an emergency response which has to be spatial. So right now within Ukraine there was, like, let's say year number one, which was 2022, there was dozens of organizations which were doing something in the sphere of emergency response, creating temporarily shelters, providing some technical infrastructure for water and sanitation. And of course, it is very much stressful conditions, but we say that we need to be very clear and careful with the next deoccupied areas, with providing kind of acupuncture emergency response, and not to be over investing in some areas which do not really need it, because the main concern from the very beginning was the coordinations of donors. They were trying to create some kind of coordination platforms, but because they are donors which are bigger, that are medium-sized, that are smaller, because of the different communication line, it was never possible. And then some municipalities were working simultaneously with the projects which were actually doubling each other. And then we come to the adaptation, that the period once the war is over and we are trying to kind of bring the life back. And this is the time when we actually try to gain as much people back as possible, considering all the safety and services aspects which are available and present in the place. And then we come to this kind of sustainable, it's all sustainable development, but we say development projects, where we start to think about new sectors of economics which were declared on the national level. So just giving you a few examples, what could be the new sectors of economy for Ukraine? Mental health, so just healthcare, recovery after the war, prosthetics, mental recovery. This is all the new big area where Ukraine could be the front runner. Then the military tech. So Ukraine aims to be self-sustaining within these defense paradigms. So basically, all things around drones and all these tech things would be blooming in the future decades. So this, in a way, we are trying to have this reverse logics where these industries and productions will take place. Industrial parks in the fields, or perhaps we can actually allocate them in the cities, because people working there will need services. So how do we actually synchronize that together with the existing municipalities? Not saying that not all the municipalities will be rebuilt, because there is a high chance that some places will not go back to life, and this is a huge question which we don't have yet answer. So I will drive you through a case study of the city called Chernihiv, which was liberated, I think 2 months after the full-scale invasion in February. And I will try to bring you through this logic for this specific city. And it's a regional center. It's a regional center, and we started to work with it as with a pilot project quite soon. I think it was April, May 2022. And at that moment, the main challenge was access to data. We didn't get enough reliable data, and the first sources we could get access to was UNOSAT, a satellite which provided some kind of you see in the left some squares where the damage has happened. So we were trying to kind of do our best, use it as a proxy with our GIS analysis, and understand like where was the destruction and what was destroyed and what kind of material was the buildings which were destroyed built from. So with this approach, with this exercise, we allocated the areas where we could actually allocate the debris from the buildings, so that we could be able to upcycle and recycle them and not create a huge dump site like 10 kilometers from the city, but start to work on it within the city and try to make a city as a living lab for this recovery, which of course faced a lot of other challenges within our work. But I think it was absolutely important, and that we started to think in this not conventional way, because everybody was saying like, hey, it's the war, you don't think about like things like that, you just bring people back and rebuild their houses. And this is always this dilemma, because on the national level it was declared this build better back idea, but when you come to the reality, you have specific people who would like to come to specific houses, and it is also a matter of dialogue and trust building, that perhaps they have to move to another area, and we would like to change the function of the area they lived in, because the city wasn't perfect before the war there. So it's really complex. So we tried to provide specific examples of how this debris could be used on the short and medium term perspective, and in a way these ideas bloomed with the local NGOs. What we tried to do was try to understand the housing problem, which was kind of one of the three major problems of the city, like after safety and access to the basic urgent services. So we understood, when we overlaid this destruction data and the functional use, what were the places and how many square meters were destroyed, and we would try to understand like what would be the short-term, mid-term, and long-term response, so that building a camp or putting the containers would be not the only option. And I think to a certain extent the cities incorporated that logics of reuse of the infrastructure of the public places, for some certain period, but then started to understand like, okay, what do we do with the not finished construction sites? But still, it is a matter of the legal framework that has to be adopted to the war logics, which takes time and which takes a lot of negotiation within the parliament. So the speed of the reaction wasn't matched with the speed of the speed of the needed reaction wasn't really matched with the speed of the like harmonization of the legal framework, which was another kind of surprising fact for us. And we understood that we need to find some kind of another solution, another way. So this is a very famous example in Ukraine called Kohati, a project which was initiated by groups similar to ours, who actually used abandoned infrastructure like either hospitals or hotels or dorms in the students in the universities. So they were able to provide kind of low tech, low price solutions, which were looking very decent, and the dignity was in the core value of their approach. But then go back to our dilemma, where to place those people who would like to get their house back. Of course, you can repair it and go back to the previous status quo, but we analyzed the abandoned areas, or areas which could be potentially densified a little bit more, and highlighted an amount of places in the city which could actually gain, so even win from moving people to another area and creating some certain housing in those places. Then another one was the mapping the memorial points and try to conserve them from any other construction work. So this is also another aspect which is quite important, that different layers have different pace in terms of their operation and their proceeding. So basically, memorialization and the ways how to memorialize the war is something that everybody informally agreed. We put a little bit outside when the war will be over, but it is important that specific spots for the memory, for the specific events would be staying, conserved, safe, non-touched until the time will come. And we come to the adaptation, and we start like thinking really big in terms of, okay, what was the problem? Why the city was collapsed? In terms of the evacuation. This was the case for Chernihiv. So if you look on the map, it is surrounded by Belarus and Russia from the north, and that's where the invasion came from. And the only evacuation route basically was across the main bridge to the south. So nobody thought that there would be such a situation when the city has to be evacuated southwards. And the only way to evacuate the city would be crossing that bridge, and the bridge was blown down by the Russians. So this is one of the cities where the Ukrainian railway wasn't able to evacuate people from, because the main transport infrastructure was destroyed. And how do we actually think about this river, not as an obstacle, not as a barrier, but as something which connects two banks of the city? So basically, we were going around different emergency situations and how do we include this situation in our future recovery plans. Then simple example, and I will accelerate a little bit more here. Simple example we have done is the bomb shelters. There were two groups of bomb shelters, ready to use, not ready to use, and there is basically a buffer of 200 meters you have to run towards one of them. And basically, when we created this spatial analysis layer, we understood that not all of the city is covered by them. And we tried to understand, like, okay, if we start to create shelters, where and what is the priority, and how do we actually how can we address it effectively? So that's how we understood like what are the main critical points to ensure that there are additional shelters. And then we come to this idea that we need to recover not after the war, but we need to make the city better and consider problems of the city before and try to look into the future. That's how we actually went together on a field trip and tried to incorporate the local knowledge into our plans. We understood like where are the main barriers and what are the main obstacles within the city, which are not necessarily the river or the barrierless environment, but that would be also a railway or a river or another park. So we mapped all of that and tried to provide the specific areas where we could activate the city. So the main idea is that we do not need to invest into every square meter of free land, but we need to be very specific in terms of projects and their location, their function, and how do we actually address it. So we actually figured out like what are the projects, where they have to be, and what is their role. And I'll go a little bit quicker. So what we tried to understand, like, okay, for the future, the temperature will go up. What would be the most hot spots of the city? So the heat map showed us the potential problem zone from this heat island perspective. But from the other side, we have incredible green-blue infrastructure, which is underused. So basically overlaying those, we could be able to make a structure based on green water infrastructure that would actually tackle these heat islands. And going even further, trying to understand like, okay, what is the pattern of the move? We looked into the Strava, which is basically the activity application, and we extracted the ways how to people commute within the city. And it was critically important, and I think the war could be called something good for the cities because it clearly highlighted the problems. So once the war in Chernihiv was in the very active phase, and the public transport was hit because it was mainly trolley buses, and the bombing damaged the infrastructure, the wires. So the people started to, though, especially those who didn't have the car, but even a car was useless after the city ran out of fuel. So people were going around by bikes or by foot. And the critical infrastructure, such as drugstores, like not all of them were open. So imagine once you have a city function, you have 300 meters to the drugstore, but all of a sudden, we have like 2.5 kilometers to the nearest drugstore. And who goes to the drugstore? It's quite often the elderly people. There's no delivery. So then you see this micromobility pattern and where people can go, where they can't go. So it was quite useful from the perspective of the urban analysis exercise. So here's the structure. We suggested that we can actually strengthen very specific axes, specific boards of the city that will increase disproportionately the comfort of life. So some areas to invest in will give so much synergy that just simple projects will not bring. And yeah, very specific. So we try to be as specific as concrete as possible, and we provided some examples of projects and where they could be placed based on different ideas. Then the idea of the multi-purpose city then is that Chernihiv is really close to the border with Russia, and there was a lot of this exchange local economy where you go to one place, you sell it, you go back, but the city wasn't really producing much apart from the timber, which is a very logical and obvious resource around. So basic idea was to create an added value, and to use the area along the railroad was quite obvious for us, but to rethink it in kind of new way that will stimulate the new sectors. Of course, a city within the radius of 20-30 kilometers from Russian Federation has very high security risks. So this is another question of the national defense strategy, how to ensure the security there, and then how to actually bring investors there. And it is a matter of sometimes even exclusive economic areas. So that's why I was talking about the national, the regional, and the local levels, because they coexist holistically together, and they can make sense together once they match each other. So that's why the urban planners working on specific cities are encouraged to look really different scales. Since we have like 1 minute left for this main part, I'll just go quickly through these specific bullet points. So one of the points for the kind of, you remember 9 clusters, and there was one cluster called plan, and I was saying about this shift from Soviet to contemporary. And it is about that the Soviet city was always centralized. You have a central square, central park, and the periphery was really lacking the social services. So what we have done is, through a number of interviews with the locals, we understood specific borders of the neighborhoods, and what is specific infrastructure like in there, and what we can activate by bringing some functions from the center towards the periphery to the outskirts. And this is some few examples of how are we able to combine functions. So thinking across the function and across the sector, for us, it is a very clear shortcut in using the city's potential. So, and like me, a few words about the organization's trajectory. So as I mentioned, it has started with the initiation of the colleagues groups. So we were following our desire to benefit the situation professionally, to help it professionally, not only help people who flee from the dangerous parts of the country. And I think that spirit was really something that was a glue that that gave a really good trajectory for Restart. So to be honest, Restart wasn't, throughout these almost 2 years, wasn't always having good times, organization-wise, finance-wise, idea-wise. But this early push, I think, gave us some fuel for the first time, because I think if we have started 1 month later, 2 months later, it won't be the same as we had, obviously. And then we were able to reach out to the international community and say, hey, we are doing this and that. And because of that, it was already a fiscally planned year, because the year is planned, November, December, previous year. We were able to get some funding, which was enough for us to cover our costs for the 2022. So we went with this prototyping of the Chernihiv case. Chernihiv case wasn't really a great success from the practical implementation of the case, because we underestimated the political risk. So, this type of exercise in the project management, so you assess the problem, you understand your resources, and you want to do something urgently and start and kick off. But in my perspective, in my opinion, it is critically important to analyze risks like in a real way. What can go wrong, and things really go wrong, and nobody thought that it will go wrong in this way. So there was a political clash of the mayor of the city with the pro-president party, which had the kind of 100% support. So there was a block of all such kind of thinking, developing options for the city. So we were not even able to get into the dialogue with the administration. However, we pushed for 3 months, so they were not interested. At some point we were struggling, because basically we ran out of money. So it's kind of very pragmatic, but yeah, we were thinking big, we were dreaming big. However, we didn't back it up with enough amount of resources, which is, from management perspective, is critical. So we can go really crazy ideas once we are all set, and this is kind of step 1, and then we go crazy ideas. And then eventually it was a critical point when we mobilized our resources into this longer fundraising and understanding our model. So right now we have shifted from this fundraising model, and on that critical moment, which was the end of the 2022 and the start of 2023, we were supported by the crowdfunding campaign amongst urban planners of Sweden. So, which is for me quite curious from the perspective of the profession. So it's kind of great solidarity of people within your profession from other country you don't really know. And they have done this office-to-office crowdfunding, which allowed us kind of 3 to 4 months work, which we actually used to understand, like, okay, how do we, the war is not going to be over anytime soon. So how do we work really like in a perspective of 3 to 5 years, and how do we ensure our expenses? So we won a few tenders, a few bids, and we understood that the sooner we institutionalize and the sooner we get out of pure grant money model, the better for the country and the better for us and for the quality of the product. So right now we're in the process of this relaunching. So we are trying to merge Zvitsi as a commercial agency with Restart as a non-profit, in a way that there will be exchange of experience and innovation. So Zvitsi will be able to provide kind of scaling of these specific principles to the municipalities, which will need it kind of in a very clear way. But Restart Ukraine will focus on the innovation and looking for these new types of solutions. And then once we have something, we can incorporate it into the next project. And basically, we consider it as a living lab that we can also share with the world from, because what we are trying to do is to create a model that would be able to respond other conflict area. I'm not trying to say it will match Israel context right now, but we're trying to look at this recovery as a universal approach and not necessarily related to the war. So here I will probably stop. Yeah, it was kind of a few quotes from the very first days of Restart, and I just like wanted to share that with you of how we felt at that moment. And yeah, it was a critical time for us, but the spirit was high, and that's something I love about those days. So yeah, I mean, this is the presentation I will be happy to share with you guys, and you can use it for your purposes. Just mention that it's from Restart, and you can go through the slides once you have a little bit more time. And yeah, that's all from my side. Thanks.